high-level champions, and he's going to talk to us specifically about the action agenda on regulated landscapes, which is really facilitating and giving momentum to a lot of actions on the ground. So with no further ado, Gonzalo, please.
Thanks so much, Lily. It's a privilege to be here in Addis Ababa with all of you and to start this important dialogue on accelerating food system transformation, because we all know that the urgency is clear and the situation of the world is not helping at all, right? We know that hunger and food insecurity is rising, and that for long, food and how the forgotten link in many of the global discussions. That's not longer the case. We have now the possibility of positioning not only the need to solve a system that is broken, but also to use the tools of food and agriculture to provide solutions for so many urgent problems. But we know at the same time that governments definitely won't solve all of this by themselves, that they won't solve it if not with the private sector, and meaning the private sector of all types and sizes. It's not only about big corporations, it's also about smallholder farmers, it's also about NGOs, it's also about even small individuals that are doing an incredible work. We know that agriculture and food systems are central to most of the challenges that we're confronting, and go for a huge level of the damage that is being generated through the climate crisis or through biodiversity loss, etc. But at the same time, it's a system that is highly impacted by the environmental crisis. What is less known is that most of the solutions that we can implement come or can be developed by this sector, by the private sector, or by the agriculture. When I say the private sector, because when it comes to the agriculture and food system, the private sector inside of it accounts for about 80% of global food production and distribution. So when it comes to agriculture and food, we're mostly talking about the private sector that drives majority of investment and innovation in agriculture, but also is already leading efforts to transition towards, say, regenerative practices. So I am a farmer myself back in Chile. I have dedicated my whole life to the link between food and agriculture and mostly the environmental challenges. I sit in the board of the Global Food Banking Network, also in the board of the Science Based Targets initiative. And yes, I can tell you the private sector has the tools and has the ambition, but ambition alone is not enough. We need enabling environments to turn ambition into action. And that's where public and private collaboration is essential. Governments must provide supportive policies, blended finance and mechanisms, and clear metrics to de-risk investment and reward regenerative outcomes. Governments must provide the trust and the stable rules of the game. And then businesses must align sourcing strategies and sustainability goals with local realities. So in that context, we have developed promising models that have been proven to work. So in 2023, at the COP28 in Dubai, we launched the Action Agenda for Regenerative Landscapes that has already united over 50 organizations with commitments exceeding $10 billion to regenerate 500 million hectares globally by 2030. And then the Landscape Accelerator Brazil, the lab, is the first initiative under the Action Agenda on Regenerative Landscape that is already mobilizing investment and aligning stakeholders on shared priorities around metrics, policies, and finance across, in this case, the Cerrado and Amazon biomes. So now this logic of mobilizing regenerative agriculture through the commitment of private organizations that are doing a great job, but now very much focused on a very specific biome in a very specific region. In this case, we're doing this in the Cerrado and Amazon biomes. And this is working. And this is something that for many of us, including myself, 5 or 10 years ago, I would have said it would have been impossible to imagine huge organizations subnational governments, investors saying, yes, let's transform a whole biome in Brazil to regeneration. And in this case, of course, governments and key stakeholders within and beyond agri-food value chains are working to enable on-the-ground solutions to scale regenerative agriculture. Because at the end, this is not just numbers. This type of initiative represents a new model of collaboration. And I have to say that very important elements. It's a type of collaboration that is place-based, and meaning that we have to focus on particular regions. We cannot just say one silver bullet that will solve everything. It's like focus on specific crops, specific regions, the reality of a community, and in this case, even a whole biome, but let's focus on a certain place. Second, let's make it inclusive. It's not only about what a big corporation can do or what a government can do. Let's make it as a whole of a society approach, where in this case, in many cases, we will find the need of connecting to smallholder farmers, family-owned farming, and also indigenous communities that are doing a really incredible work that we need to incorporate, because if we fail on providing them the economic and development incentives, we will not reach these goals. So we incorporate in an inclusive way these communities, and also focusing on outcomes. Outcomes for people in the center, nature, and climate. These initiatives shows what's possible when public and private actors work together. Again, putting people in the center, but then aligning the economic outcomes with nature and I invite all of us, businesses, governments, financial and civil society, to lean in. With whatever hat you're using, lean in. Let's use this dialogue to identify where our interests converge, where our tools align, and where we can act together to accelerate the regenerative transition. Let's use this moment to move from vision to implementation together. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Super inspiring as ever. Thank you for your contribution. I think what I heard from you, I would love the different panels to reflect about, but also the people who are here to listen. You talked about indeed place-based and having particular issues in mind, because we can have a framework. We can all have a general definition of what is regenerative agriculture with 5 key outcomes. That, by the way, is really important that we all remember that, which is farmer livelihoods, and then climate, and then biodiversity, water, and soil. But ultimately, it's all about the place-based action. And I was a speaker in the previous session where one farmer representative was actually calling to reframe the wording PPP to talk about public, private, and people partnership, very much saying that we tend to forget to really ground it in the people. And so I'd love to hear from you about that. I also heard about making that inclusive, and we could reflect a bit about that as well. So I'm going to call the first panelist on stage, please, and name them as they're coming in. An applaud for the panelists, please. So we're going to have Christian Vusvoras, who is Senior Manager, Global Public Affairs for Nestlé. Christian, please come in. Iman Aboulfef, who is Head of External Engagement, Corporate Sustainability and Innovation of OCP Group. And finally, last but not least, Matheus Lopes, who is Advisor in the Minister's Cabinet for the Brazilian Ministry of Rural Development. An applaud for them, please. So, in this first panel, we're going to start with understanding what are the success factors. You know, a lot of people are saying, let's stop focusing on the problems and rather show where there is light and how we can really draw on existing successes. So we want to talk about the success factors for implementing local landscape approaches in Brazil as a first round. And then we will elevate ourselves and see what are the learnings for the wider ecosystem. So first, we're going to turn to you, Matheus. We'd like to hear from the Brazilian government's perspective, what policies or programs have most effectively enabled local solutions? And how are the goals? What are the most promising? Please, you remember you have 3 minutes each of you to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to speak at this podium, where yesterday, Brazil removal from the hunger map was announced according to the SOFI report. This is a political priority for our country, and this is what we want to propose with the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. And I want to bring to you that from a climate perspective, Brazil is also positioning itself as an ambitious vision. And this is what we are going to bring on COP30. While we benefit from a clean energy matrix, 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from food systems, namely agriculture and deforestation. And our response nowadays is bold. We have reduced the deforestation in Amazon by 50%, and we are committed to zero deforestation until 2030. But we know that protecting the forest is not enough, and globally, we must regenerate our rural areas. And Brazil currently has 160 million hectares of pasture land, 60% are degraded, and of this, 40 million hectares have high agriculture potential. In this response, Brazil government launched the national program of the conversion of the pastures, coordinated by the Ministry of Agriculture, and it's a partner from LAB. And the program aims to promote the regenerative agriculture in partnership with public banks, agribusiness, investors, and innovative initiatives. And Brazil has both the conditions and experience to scale up low-carbon agriculture, such as no-till, cover crops, and the use of bio-inputs. I am from the Ministry of Agrarian Development and Family Farming. In Brazil, we have two ministries, one from the big agriculture, another one from the family farming. In Brazil, 77% of all farmers are familiar, and it is 4 million families. And on MDA, we are defending that the family farming is a strategic pathway to food systems transformation and to be a central part of the solution of the climate crisis. It places people in the center of the equation, and for that reason, we are promoting the agroecological transition, and that is to be inclusive, as Gonzalo said, as a strategy with people. And we believe that the recovery of these degraded areas should not serve solely to expand commodity production or to sustainable livestock, but instead help to build a regenerative project for forest reforestation with productive dimension, driving bioeconomy, food production, and fight against rural poverty. That is a main issue from Brazil. The highest level of poverty in Brazil, now it is on the Amazon region. And that's why we have launched the national program from Productive Forests with a focus on Amazon biome, our flagship initiative from COP30. And it's a program that supports the recreated lands through agroforestry systems, led by family farmers and traditional communities. We give technical assistance, grants, and subsidize for implementation of 1 hectare per family, and the development of seed networks, community nurseries, and local capacities, which we consider essential. In short, it's a large-scale agroforestry promotion program. Our goal is to restore 10,000 hectares, with benefiting 10,000 families. So you can see 10,000 hectares with a big farmer can be 1 farmer. But we are talking about 10,000 hectares with 10,000 families. And we are financing through our public banks, but we are also building private partners to develop projects. In Brazil, we have good examples of enterprise in the Amazon region, such as Natura, such as big cooperatives that are developing, and we see this as a prosperous pathway. And at ECHO 92, Brazil showed the world that it's possible to preserve forests. 35 years later, we have learned that standing forests alone is not enough. They must be also productive. And we are fully open to dialogue with the private sector. We were not previously familiar with the lab. It was more close to the MAPA, the Agriculture Ministry, but we see many synergies and potential partnerships within the framework of the National Program of Productive Forests. This is a tested initiative ready to be scaled through combined efforts from the public and private sectors, and we believe that including large-scale agroforestry in the COP28 action agenda on regenerative landscapes was a key step, and we want to build this transformation together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You've really illustrated all of the specificities of the regions that we're talking about here, and you know, to the point that Gonzalo was making before, and the strength around forest preservation, restoration, and sustainable agriculture, with a strong focus on farmer-centered and people-centered as well. And this whole idea of that's being pushed by the Brazil government, and yeah, really love this approach. So now I would like to turn to Christian to hear about the Nestlé perspective in what you consider to have been critical success factors in the way that you're pushing forward your sustainability goals in the Brazil context.
Thank you, Emmeline, and hi, everyone. So I'm not Brazilian, and I'm not going to pretend to be one, but what I think I can offer is kind of an external perspectives, because Brazil is very important to us. You know, I have three, I think, key success factors or key messages. I think the first one is really what we're talking about here is really kind of an economic opportunity or challenge, you know, depending on how you frame it. Nestlé Brazil, it's the third biggest consumer market for us, so it's huge. So we're a big company, and it's third biggest consumer market. And in addition to that, 25% of our sourcing volumes worldwide come from Brazil, which is, you know, which I think shows a little bit the dimensions. And I think I'm saying that because, you know, if we are part of something like, you know, the action agenda on regenerative landscapes or the Brazil, it's not because of charity, it's really because it's an economic necessity. You know, I'm always amazed by this figure that over the past 100 years, you know, world agricultural production has I think grown 5 times, which I think is an incredible achievement by the farming sector. At the same time, we do all know that, you know, this has come in the past at the cost of the soils, at the cost of the forests. You know, it hasn't delivered everywhere the social benefits that we want to see. And I think you really, and you talk to the farmers, especially, you know, the bigger ones, you know, there is really a realization that it's an economic necessity to be part of an integrated landscape management and really work on transforming the landscapes, becoming regeneratives, transforming the soils. All of this is really an economic opportunity. And it's, you know, it's not everywhere like this. I think if you go to other countries, including my own country, Switzerland, you know, the discussion that we have today, I think would be very much still framed kind of as an ecologic discussion, but this is about economic benefits and not only about ecologic benefits. Second point that I want to make, success, you know, it's, I mean, it's quite an easy and a straightforward one, but the success is really, you really, I mean, there's no regenerative land for the entire world. I mean, you really need to work at the landscape level. I mean, that's also why it's called a landscape level. I mean, only in Brazil, I mean, you find such a variety, I think, of different landscapes, and you really have to look at the local conditions, at the climate conditions, at the cultural condition. I was just thinking, Matthew, you know, in Brazil, you also find this incredible variety between small scale farmers and the big farmers, you know, working kind of in the same landscape. So you really need to do this. And for that, and here I come to my third point, you really need to go down to the level and talk to your stakeholders and and you know, this relates back to the first panel, and be farmer centric. I remember when I went to the World Food Forum 3 years ago, I had a discussion, and maybe some of you know Luisa from the World Farmers Organization, and she told me in her kind of charming Italian accent that Christian, when you and your colleagues at Nestle talk about farmers, it always sounds like what they should do, but if you flip the coin and invite a farmer in the morning to your hotel room and let him kind of select your tie, how would you feel? And this stuck with me, and we started to work with the World Farmers Organization, but it's really something that we have to have in mind when we talk about integrated actions at the landscape level.
Thanks so much. So both making sure this is grounded in economic benefits, both I would say for the companies along the value chain, but the farmers themselves, and thinking of the different situations in being farmer-centric. I know this is going to resonate with you because we often have that discussion, Iman, as well. So from OCP Group, can you highlight how your innovations in soil health and sustainable inputs have contributed to sustainable and regenerative agriculture in Brazil?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for the invitation. Maybe before deep diving into Brazil, I would like to give a few context about who is OCP, how we are operating globally, and then deep dive into Brazil. So at OCP, we are guided by a clear belief that the future of agriculture, the future of agriculture should be sustainable, and as a plant nutrition solution provider, and also as a provider of phosphate-based fertilizers across the world, and the fact that we are custodians of around 70% of phosphate reserves that are available in Morocco, we are guided by a clear mission that is feeding the soil to feed the planet. And this is something that drives everything that we do, from our facilities to the farmer gate, the sustainable product that we are producing. And to this, we are walking the talk, and we are committed to be carbon neutral 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement, so meaning scope 1 and 2 by 2040. And we are investing a lot in carbon farming projects because we think that it's a transformative solution for the agriculture. And we base these carbon farming projects with our sustainable and decarbonized product, meaning that we provide to farmers knowledge about how to use fertilizers, when to use them, what is the right nutrients needed, etc. Also helping them embed sustainable agriculture practices and supporting them all through this journey. So this is globally. Now coming back to Brazil. So Brazil now just arable land country in the world, and is responsible of, I'm talking under the control of my colleague, of 11% of the food population. So it's a huge market. We are dedicating 23 only to Brazil. So meaning that we are really committed through our OCP NutriCrop subsidiary, which is responsible of selling fertilizers and supporting supplying the world with low carbon customized fertilizers. And we have also created back in 2010 a dedicated subsidiary, regional subsidiary to Brazil, to be able to be farmer centric and create this proximity with farmers. And we are supporting the Brazilian government to achieve their goal, which is to produce without increasing productivity, without opening new areas, and be able to preserve up to 40 million hectares of degraded pastures. So for this is only able through, let's say, soil health first and soil fertilization. Knowing that Brazil tropical soils are lacking phosphate naturally, fertilizers are one of the solutions to help the degraded pastures. So OCP Brazil is pursuing, as I said, a farmer-centric program with agronomists working closely with farmers. Now I can give an example of two projects. One is still under embargo, but I will share with you today. The first one is 4,000 hectares of degraded pastures that were launched back in 2022 with local farmers, and to help them issue carbon farming credits carbon by the end. So it's not only supporting the fact that we are having a better productivity, then limiting land management, and also supporting farmers get a better income through the carbon credits. And then now we are scaling this project to a more largest landscape. So 10,100 hectares, meaning the equivalent of 140 soccer field that is under restoration now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. When I hear those numbers, you're right. I mean, Brazil is so huge. When I hear those numbers, I'm wondering why the topic today is going from pilot to large scale, because it sounds like you're doing it. So at least we're going to poke a little bit more into that and ask you all, are we at the scale that we need? Or if we're not, why is that? What are we missing? And how do we get there? Right? And again, the idea is to take some of the learnings from here that we can also replicate in other places, obviously in Africa as well, despite the different circumstances. So first of all, going back to you, Christian, what kind of policy or financial incentives would help to unlock more action from the private sector in your view?
It's a good question. Before I was coming here, I was reading a little bit, what are the expectations of the summit. And, I read a lot about private sector has to come in and step in. And on the one side, I couldn't agree more. But at the same time, I was kind of, puzzled a little bit because, we have been investing already 1 billion Swiss francs over the past 5 years into this transition into agriculture. If you just take the example of Brazil, coffee, cocoa, dairy, we have already been there, and it has shown some results. Today, we have already 20% of our sourcing volumes that are coming from farms that are starting to adapt regenerative practices. However, I think this is kind of the old way, and here's what I think we can become better, Emmeline. And the old way was kind of, we work through our own network of agronomists. We have a partnership here and there, but kind of very limited in terms of scope, and the impact also quite limited. And I think the reason why we have come together here is really, and that's the opportunity, work in a much more integrated you work across different value chain, you work across the value chain with your different stakeholders. You bring in the public sector, you talk to the farmers, you bring in the blended finance, and then it starts becoming really interesting. However, there are to that, and one challenge, a very practical challenge that we always run into sooner or later in those discussions is, where geographically do you want to focus on, and then it's always a discussion, okay, we are here, but we would be interested in another place. I think for the future would be nice to kind of solve this challenge of how do we create kind of more transparency, trust, like on future planning. So we would like to be there with coffee in 5 years to have, because otherwise we always run into this discussions where there is kind of a challenge, and then we go back internally to our colleagues in procurement and they're not fully aligned. And, that's one very practical challenge that we have. Then on the finance side, a big challenge that we find, when we talk to the bigger development banks is always the ticket size, which in our experience, the expectation, starts somewhere around $100 million, which is big even for us. And, maybe it works in Brazil or in Mexico or kind of in the big sourcing markets. But I do think that, we need a little bit more flexibility on the ticket size in terms of, maybe clustering certain projects so they can be bundled. And then the last point, and I haven't heard it enough here at the Food System Summit, is consumers. Last week we had kind of the 6 months results announcement that we do. And this week I'm sitting here and kind of the conversations are sometimes quite different, the kind of the tone of voice. So if we talk about the private sector, there's the company, but there's also the consumer behind. So if we want to really make this transition to more regenerative landscapes, sooner or later we really have to bring the consumer along. I have one example that we have is with Nespresso, where we looked 10 years ago at which are kind of the ancient coffee cultures that have disappeared, and where could we make an impact and grow these ancient coffee cultures, bring them back, work with the people, bring the plants in and sell it to consumers. Today with Nespresso, we have a Reviving Origins kind of product that is just fantastic from an impact perspective, but also from a story perspective, because it really connects the farm with it's a premium brand, and bringing this to large scale, to mainstream, to the Nestle size is really, really challenging. But like this consumer piece is for me somehow missing, and I think it's really important to embark as well.
Thank you, Christian. You're expanding the scope of the thinking indeed, because it's true that we're all focusing on how do we unlock the investments, how do we de-risk, and looking very much at how we bring in different sources of finance directly from, I would say, bankers, different investor groups, looking at policymakers as well. But it's true that we don't look at the market's potential. And that's another discussion, I would say, but that's really important to think about. And also philanthropies, by the way. But importantly, if you want to add another P to PPPP, we would also add philanthropies. But coming back to the question of moving, I heard you very strongly. I think it's quite the idea of the regenerative landscape section agenda. You said, we need to not have each time to have such a hurdle, finding the right partners, finding the right policy mechanisms in each of the places. So is there a way to facilitate that matchmaking? And I know there is efforts, so FAO has this hand-in-hand initiative, they're really trying to facilitate matchmaking. The regenerative landscapes agenda brings in a database of all of the efforts all over the world on regenerative agriculture. But we need to find ways by using digitalization, as we heard in the previous panel, to really make that much more smooth and simple. So I'm going to turn to Iman and thereafter to Matthews, trying to give you 2 minutes each, if that's okay. Again, Iman, what's needed to move? You've already said you moved from pilot to large scale, but could you talk a bit more about the finance part and the policy part, or maybe the consumer part, as Christian brought in?
Thank you, Emily. I think I will echo what Christian was saying. I think collaboration is key to move from small scale project to large scale. Collaboration is key. We cannot do it by ourselves, and one size fits approach is not feasible. So getting back to the collaboration part, collaboration across the value chain is important, but not only. Collaboration should go beyond to financial institutions, as you said, to standard setters, to policymakers, etc. Well, we have, getting back to Brazil, we have been able to sign an MOU with Embrapa, which is the Brazilian Agricultural Research Institute, through OCP NutriCrops, and in order to find innovative agriculture and localized solution for the Brazilian. Those solutions can help indeed support the scalability. Secondly, there is the lab. You've been talking earlier about lab. Lab has been instrumental in conversion and convening partners across the value chain and beyond.
Lab is the landscape accelerator for Brazil. So it's in the context of regenerative landscapes action agenda, a deep dive in lab.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And as I said, another one is the one-size-fits approach is no more available and cannot continue to solve problems. Then getting back instead of consumers, I will talk about farmers and private sector. Reward and recognition are also important. Farmers lack reward. Carbon farming projects are one, and credit carbon and one of the solutions to get reward for those farmers. I've been attending yesterday one of the panels where was talking about get recognition for the knowledge also, because they have a huge knowledge and they are not recognized for. And then when I talk about recognition for private sector, and also talking about how standard setters could recognize all the important efforts that we are investing in carbon farming and in regenerative and sustainable agriculture, meaning that avoided emissions removals that we are doing in farmland should be somehow accounted in our Scope 3 inventory. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So I hear your call to everyone to really make sure we align national policies and policy environments to really support these efforts that deliver on nutrition, food security, and sustainability as well. Just before we move to Matthews, I want to remind you that we're going to have 5-10 minutes for questions and comments. So if you have any to make, think about it as we listen from Matthews for the last one. So Matthews, what, from your perspective, because you represent here much more what are the pressing gaps that you see in aligning private investments with public investment?
Thank you for the question. I would like to highlight 5 topics. The first one, big challenge for us is structuring local value chains. Because in Brazil, we have a large volume of rural credit. There is no shortage of low interest credit for agriculture. What is lacking are functional local production and market chains. Ones that are easy to farmers to join, that are profitable, fair in terms of payment, supported by local technical knowledge, and based on viable locally adapted production technologies. And the role of the market on that is central. It must create the demand for the regenerative agriculture and bioeconomy products. The second point, it's about innovation in agriculture. We need close action, harvest by harvest, because innovation in agriculture is incremental. It happens incrementally. There are early adopters willing to take risks, but most farmers are conservatives in their decision-making and need to see results with their own eyes. That's why we need to start now and strengthen local capacities. And that requires persistent technical assistance, and we must support the producers, organizations, and cooperatives and their agro-industries, that is, who bring efficiency to the market, especially to the smallhold farmers. Third challenge, to Brazil, a major barrier to private investment is land tenure regularization, especially in the Amazon context, so we are advancing on that. The fourth topic of public-private cooperation is the technology development. We must, in the family farming perspective, we must reduce the drudgery of agricultural labor. This is putting rural succession at risk. We are currently investing in our government more than $40 million with the industries to development of machinery and equipment suited to family farming. For example, we are supporting the development of an acai harvester, because until today, mostly relies on people climbing high trees. And we must break away the historic business as usual trend of technology development that focused on less crops with bigger areas. And the technology must look to the big variety of crops that occupies less area. And we must include the people on this technology development. And the last point, we also have in Brazil very innovative green finance initiatives to bring together the private investments, such as blended finance, green bonds, and sustainable taxonomy. I'm not the best person to go into detail, but I can put you all in contact. And I thank you for the panel, which seems to go to the heart of how to promote a transition in food systems from an economic perspective, through approaches that must be rooted in local realities. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. You've actually given us quite some thoughts in terms of how we bring together the public and the private sector along those topics of local production and market change, which we've heard a lot through the Food System Summit, I would say, over the last 2 days. The question that resonates from also what Christian was saying, what's the market? What's the demand for such products? Innovation and technology is not something we've heard so much so far, actually. Maybe we're going to rebound on this. And finally, the whole green financing area. Would love to hear from all of you if you have any comment or questions on what the panelists have kindly shared over the last 35 minutes before we move to the next panel. Don't be shy. Some people are taking pictures. Okay, maybe I'd like to hear from some of the representatives of the different African countries who are here. Does that resonate? Or are you thinking that the context you heard in Brazil is absolutely so different? Or are the challenges that you heard exactly the same? Because for me, they resonate from what I heard. Anyone wants to chime in? Okay, I guess not. Okay, Peter Bakker, CEO and President of the BBCSD.
Somebody has to open it. So it's a fantastic story, these Brazil cases. And so what it does make clear is there is an investment case, but there's always a second layer, and that's the business case to do this. How do you guys, the two business representatives, how do you think about the business case for these investments in regenerative agriculture in Brazil?
Right, I'm going to turn to all of you. I mean, yes, Kumer wants to answer first. The business case.
Thank you. Very question and a very precise one. I think that all the strategy that we are pursuing has to be NPV positive at the end. We are businesses. If it's not, I'm not sure that businesses will go and take the risk on their own to go forward into some project. Those projects, Carbon Farming One, have delivered concrete results and shown that they are NPV positive indeed in the long term. So not only for businesses, but also for the communities that are benefiting from those carbon credits.
Yeah, good question. You know, business case. I do think that on the one side, I mean, we are also talking a little bit about like a necessity, resilience. So to some degree, there is objective to that, to a company, and obviously it comes with a cost, with an investment. But at the same time, it brings benefits to the people locally, to the farmers, to the local economy who benefits from the transformation of a landscape. But the business case for a company like us obviously comes with the consumer, which brings me back to the point that we have been making, that I've been making, and it's not always an easy one, because like from a consumer perspective, if you want to sell or bring a story of regenerative landscapes to a consumer, it's somehow expected from a consumer, so bring an additional benefit and really make it tangible, I think, to a consumer, so that you can bring it to them. I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry.
Thanks a lot. All right, then thank you so much for our panelists. We're going to move to the next panel. So I'm going to, we're going to take a picture first before we move to the next panel. You may probably. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. So now we're going to call to the second panelist. Here you go. So we're going to have Emmanuel Marchand, who is Senior Vice President of Sustainability and Partnerships for Danone. Nico Mes, who is Partnership Builder, Netherlands Food Partnership. Matthias Roising, who is First Counselor and Policy Advisor on Agriculture, Environment and Climate Change, Digital Transition, Delegation of the European Union to the African Union. And Leanne Jackson, Head of Division, Agri-Food Trade and Markets, OECD. And applaud as they're coming up. Thank you. This panel was really to try and cross different regions. So we had a focus on Brazil, mostly because Brazil is so big. There is a lot of learnings from the existing initiatives, and we really want to create a link between the Food System Summit, the learnings here, and the COP30 that is coming up. But there's also quite a lot of learnings that are coming from other regions. And here what we want to do is draw from some of the work that is happening also in Europe, to take also a more helicopter view and then see as well what are some of the gaps or the barriers that have been identified and some solutions that could be considered. So in the first round of discussions, 3 minutes for each of you, we're going to talk about the successes that you have seen and some of the learnings as well. So I'm going to first turn to you, Emmanuel Marchand. I had a very long question for Emmanuel, and I said that's way too long. Can we just focus on what is working and what is not working? So let's do that.
You want both working now?
Depends how long you're going to be.
Okay, so
you have 3 minutes.
So I've been hearing a lot about PPPs in the last 2 days, and I was thinking, what could we bring as Danone to this conversation? And the first thing I would like to say is our experience is there is a lot of private partnerships working today. There is more and more, and it is progressing. And that's the first thing I would like to share. We are a food company, very local in many ways, because we collect milk, and when you collect milk, you are very connected to the farmers. You meet them, in fact, every day. In the last 15 years, we've been working on developing projects with the farmers, trying to be as farmer-centric as we can, as holistic as we can. And we have delivered on the yield, the quality, the livelihood of the farmers, or the reduction of carbon. But we've never done it alone. We've always done it with partners. Just because we don't know everything, but also because agriculture, especially in emerging countries, is a tough business, and you need partners to co-finance. And our experience is we've been able to co-finance at a certain scale. And that's going to be obviously the second part, which is how to bring it from certain scale to real scale. But at that certain scale, one of my responsibilities today is I am in charge of the Danone NGO named Ecosystem, which is working the last 15 years on those partnerships. And I had a talk with my CFO. And I told him, well, we have been able to do 1-to-1. So more or less, whenever we have put $1, we've been able to
from partners in the last 15 years. But now we need to accelerate because climate change is forcing acceleration for resilience. And my CFO very simply said, okay, I will give you 50, just find the other 50 and then I will increase. So the real topic is now projects are bigger. We did 100 projects times 2 million euro. And now we need to do projects that are sometimes 100 million euro because we're talking hundreds of thousands of farmers. So we need to raise the bar on scale, and that will be the second part. The last thing I wanted to say is I will not comment on the regenerative landscape, which is part of the work you are doing as a WBCSD and others. We are doing some landscape programs, and we are also seeing progress there. We were kind of dreaming of that, and now we see various pilots in many places, and there is no, because there is one soil, there is one farmer. We need to work together. The governance is complex, but they are really starting. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks so much. So basically you're saying, I think it resonates a little bit with what we heard from the previous panelists is, there is great examples. There is hope because we're seeing ways to invest, co-invest, and it's working, but the challenge is huge globally. And how do we accelerate this action? How do we connect the people? How do we multiply? And that's definitely something we want to talk further about. Thank you for that. Nicole, I'm going to turn to you and see how you measure success in global partnerships. And maybe if you also want to reflect on the comment the feedback from Emmanuel.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe to clarify, we are an independent actor as a Netherlands Food Partnership, consisting of the 4 stakeholder groups that all have a role in food systems transition. So the government of the Netherlands is a partner of us, 2 ministries of Agriculture and Foreign Affairs, but also the private sector, civil society and research are part of us as a partnership, just to clarify our position. If we think about transitions of food systems, and particularly with the ecosystems outcomes that are today maybe the heart of our conversation, we use transition theory to also measure success, because there are a few models also of early adopters, bigger numbers of companies or stakeholders stepping on board, and then gradually getting a landscape in which several other stakeholders follow that example. And then in the final stage, there is even if is institutionalization of the change or regulatory arrangements being created. And I think this transition model that we follow in some of the work that we do is, I think, important to measure success, because you want to see success in which more stakeholders step on board, each in their own role. But maybe another level of measuring success in partnerships building, which is our kind of a core job as Netherlands Food Partnership, we see really the classics of output, outcome, impact can be applied also in building partnerships. If you have an output such as a networking meeting in which a number of stakeholders, either from Brazil or in other regions, exchange what their best practices are and learn mutually, that is a beautiful output, because you can also think about which innovations have worked, why have they worked, joint learning. The outcome level of partnerships building is that some people step up and say, well, possibly we can build a shared vision, experiences that we share our idea on the way forward, the scale, because we have discussed scale this morning. Can we commit to collaborate? That's the level of outcome that's, I think, most interesting, because, well, it's easy to say, I'm ready to do something, but is it a true commitment? And I think measuring also in our networks, the commitment to collaborate, knowing that we are at that stage, that's an interesting level. And then also the different levels of private sector, but also the public sector and civil society, farmers, consumers, if you like it. Of course, I like them. I'm one myself. Do they pool resources? That outcome. Then impact is very difficult. You ask me, how do you measure success? Of course, measuring impact is difficult in all kinds of different domains of the food system. But at some point, new practices, also the innovative practices in the region, ecological parts of the outcome domain. Implemented, maybe stronger enabling environments get created. Legislation is necessary in some places, or maybe commitments by the private sector themselves to kind of set certain standards that you want to peer control or assess, how you like it. Then there could be impact. And then we talk about the long term, because that impact will not be there tomorrow after the day after this food systems stock take. I hope this is a clear story, because it may sound theoretical, but we combine these two models, in fact, in the way we work, and we hope that partners also can apply them.
No, thank you. I think there is quite some learning from that. What I heard earlier on, which I hear you say as well, is in order to make a partnership work, you have to, first of all, have clear knowledge of what you are after, but also being able to measure short-term and long-term. And I think that's something that we're all struggling with, and probably the public sector and the private sector as well, because we know that if you talk restoring land, as we heard from Brazil, or preserving the watershed here in Ethiopia, it's a long-term project. But to keep people motivated, you have to show what's the business case, what's the return on investment. If it takes 10 years, what can I already get in a few years' time? And how do I measure that I'm progressing towards that outcome? So we're going to now turn to Liane from OECD to hear about, actually, it's a good segue to the returns that are long-term, and how you can, how some of the European governments are managing to de-risk private investment, thinking short-term and long-term.
Thanks very much, Emmeline. It's really a pleasure to be here. So at the OECD, really, our mission is providing data and evidence and creating spaces for convening in order for policies to promote policies for better lives. And I wanted to make 3 points a bit in relation to your question. So one is the importance of transparency and information in order to facilitate learning, because we're going to need a lot of learning as we go through this transformation. One is about metrics, because I think in this world right now, there's lots of different kinds of metrics, and that might be a hurdle that we need to get over. And the third is the issue of coherence, especially in the policy world. We want to make sure that our policies are aligned toward the objectives we want. And this also links back to my comment on metrics. So maybe coming into this transparency, for years, OECD has done monitoring of policy support in agriculture. And in the most recent, so every year we have an annual production, and last year we showed that of the 4 monitors, so that's OECD, the European Union, and 11 emerging economies, we estimated $842 billion US go into the sector in terms of public support. And this is a combination of direct transfers and also trade measures at the border. And of that, only about 12% is going into what we call general services, which are services that are linked to innovation, research and development, training and capacity building, those kinds of measures. And that proportion of public support has declined over the past 10 years. So 10 years ago, it was around 16%. In the most recent report that we did, it was around 12%. As the OECD, our members are saying, we need to take a close look at that. We need to think about what the enabling environment is to make sure that the system is actually supporting the innovation that's going to drive growth, which is what we're looking for. In terms of metrics, well, this is a nice link to our focus on the European Union's monitoring exercise. We also look at policy developments. So what's changing in our member countries? And of course, we've been collecting information across all our members, including the European Union. And we have observed that the European Union, of course, is moving towards these eco schemes. And the question around the eco schemes is, how is the public sector supporting those initiatives? So some of the support that comes from the European Union is recouping costs in terms of trying to get the outcomes that the European Union policymakers are looking for. And a smaller proportion is actually paying for the services that the farmers are providing. So paying for the greenhouse gas reductions, paying for soil question is, what's the agreed metric in order to be able to draw the link between what the policies are trying to incentivize and what's actually happening on the ground? Quite a robust conversation at the OECD around how do we think about what's an environmentally harmful type of support and what's environmentally beneficial. And that raises all these questions around metrics. And if we have time, I can talk a little bit more about that. And the final point I wanted to make is we pay a lot of attention on coherence, because we know that across ministries, we have a whole basket full of different kinds of policies, and you might have an environmental ministry that is regulating in a certain way, and you have the agricultural ministry that's trying to create incentives for other kinds of behavior. And if you don't get some kind of conversation across the ministries, then the policy environment is complex, moving in unaligned ways, and that makes it complicated for the private sector to actually engage, and it creates confusing incentives in terms of where the investments should go. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I heard policy coherence, whereby quite often one of the challenges, and that's why we have Food Systems Summit here, is that we look at agricultural production through different lenses and give some support with one goal in mind, which sometimes has a detriment to another. And there is this famous report that is known from the World Bank that estimates that I think it's over 80% of all agricultural subsidies in the world are detrimental to people and the planet. So the question here, they're aiming at one outcome, but actually they're probably more detrimental to many things. So is there a way, and I heard you in looking at the different OECD policies and what are some of the unintended consequences? What you also alluded to was the EU eco schemes, and that's a nice segue to now hearing from Matthias. How EU African partners in embedding regenerative principles into agricultural value chains development?
Yes. You've seen the photos. That was not me. I never had such a beard. It was actually ex Vice President Franz Timmermans from the previous von der Leyen Commission. So I didn't shave. But maybe there's a new photo coming up in a moment. So I'm real. I'm not an avatar. Good. Let's go to the policies. And you know, Franz Timmermans not so bad, because of course I have to talk about policies which we want to translate into our international partnerships. And Franz Timmermans has been the father of the European Green Deal under the first von der Leyen Commission, and it is alive. It is alive. We have the Farm to Fork strategy. It was mentioned in some aspects. We have the biodiversity strategy. We have a circular economy action plan. We have the nature restoration law. It's all there. We cut a few red tapes, but we translate that all in open partnerships. And I should also mention in this context, in the agro-food systems, the EUDR, the EU Deforestation Free Regulation, which gives some countries a headache because the deadline is this year. But I was last week in Kenya, for example. We hear a lot of increasing number of readiness also. So yeah. We had, for example, how do we translate, of course, at political level, first of all. We had the EU African Union Agriculture Ministerial in Rome, end of June, during which Moses Vilakati signed the Mission Soil Manifesto. That was an EU initiative where, of course, agroecology, soil matters, soil health is being underlined. And just last week, at the AMSIN in Nairobi, Commissioner Roswell and Commissioner Vilakati signed or launched the Circular Economy Action Plan, because I think when we have to talk about sustainability, we have to talk about sustainability, circularity as well. So we do a lot. I think I don't have to be shy that we are presumably the largest, by far the largest donor as Team Europe. I'm not talking about the EU only, but as Team Europe on value chains, on agri-food systems, and of course following more and more a landscape approach, looking into engaging with local farmers. They are the owners of the land, maybe not nominal sometimes or legally, but of course they are the custodians of the land, and they should make the best out of it. In this context, agroforestry is of course super important, very, very important, in an integrated way of agriculture, because let's not forget, not only in Europe, we want to make agriculture production carbon neutral. You know, the Green Deal is our cannot also want to inspire countries worldwide, and our consumers in Europe also ask more and more for exactly that. You know, traceability, of course, the carbon footprint, all a European policy, but also it's a policy also internationally. And I think in most parts it's very much welcome. Implementation-wise, we provide plenty of funding through Global Gateway in agri-food systems as well. I think the second question, I have a chance to go a little bit deeper into financing. And of course, the EU is also on the agroecology coalition. And we also look very much at land governance, where the EU supports the International Land Coalition and also affirms the importance of responsible land governance, I would say, in all projects which we have in this field, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, throughout the world.
Actually, why don't we go now to the second question? So I think it's a nice segue. Now we want to go back to how do we mobilize, you know, the funding. And so you're right. You could continue on your flow and tell us indeed from this EU angle to supporting the and just starting to allude to some of the different funding solutions. Do you want to tell us more about that? Yeah. Matthias, I'm thinking you. Yeah.
Maybe I was a bit absent-minded.
Okay. No, I meant you wanted to talk about the solutions, the funding solutions. Why don't you just draw on that right now?
Okay, I can do that. Of course, you know, we have a lot of matching grant schemes for smallholder farmers. Before coming to Addis, I'm based in Addis now, was for 5 years in Zambia. There we had a program called Enterprise Zambia. Now it heads into Enterprise Zambia 2.0, where we have matching grant schemes for innovative sustainable farming. Of course, we also have to look at financial instruments. Yeah, we have to get even more funding, because I think we always hear access to finance is really a big bottleneck. Financial instruments means we want to have also loans. We sharing, we have guarantee schemes in this context. But I think it's a very strong call to the private sector, which I can make to not follow the geopolitical new trend again, to look at shareholder value and profit only, profit maximization, but the EU continues to stand for shared value and impact investments along the triple bottom line of planet, people, and profit. So that's a call, I think, to the private sector. We have Nestle here, Danone, but also all the others. And it's even beyond agriculture, of course. It's on all aspects. So this call, and then, of course, the local banks are important. I think we see worldwide and also in Africa, and here in Addis Ababa, you have a great example. The biggest skyscrapers are from the banks. And I talked recently to the president of the Ethiopia Development Bank, and I made this point as well. You know, there's so much profit being made by banks. Invest in youth, in startups, in SMEs, take more risks in your hand, makes a skyscraper maybe 2 floors smaller, and you can do a lot of financial instruments and guarantees and take more risks. Try to talk also to central banks, of course, as well, to lower the interest rates. Yeah. So we have all these bottlenecks, but you know, pointing the finger to the global north is not always the right way. One also has to look at home. Abyssinia Bank, no, I will not mention banks now, but skyscrapers are big, and there are new banks in the make in Addis Ababa and in other capitals in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. So these banks have to be also walk the talk on the triple bottom line, and it takes more risks. Yes, you lose. But Bill Gates would not have been Microsoft or Apple, we wouldn't have it. It started in a garage, and then somebody put money in these companies, and some fail, others succeed. So I think really a strong call to both private sector, including banks, to be part of that journey.
Thank you very much. You're pretty much talking about courage here, innovation, and definitely that's something we keep hearing, that the existing financial models are old-fashioned. They're not, you know, they're not prepared to help us deal with the co-sharing of the risk. That's definitely something that we hear as well. And then also, as you say, very to stand for in the future. Unfortunately, that's not sufficient. I mean, we heard earlier Christian talk about Nestle. You have to show that there is obviously a business model. Now, probably there can be a different level of return on investment, and that's often the issue with a number of financial institutions. Is they're really return on investment, and we need to see how can we develop other models that de-risked and give you maybe lower return on investment, but are contributing to our shared ambition. I'm going to turn now to Emmanuel to hear about the sources of public and private capital. Indeed, how can they be better blended to support the transition from your perspective?
Thank you. So first, I just would like to react on some aspects of the conversation. I believe the conversation about the metrics, so I'm not, can you? Okay, the conversation about the metrics, I had not prepared for this for today, but I really believe it is extremely important. It's not that it's so difficult to work in partnerships around metrics, but when you see the speed of climate change, there is now an urgency to really align on an integrated framework. And I am dealing with a lot of impatience from the business people of Danone saying, come on, tell me the 5 KPIs and I can go. Tell me how to measure it. I really sense it is an extremely important discussion if we want to move forward. We're not that far, but we're not yet there. Then indeed okay, I was ending the, I like a lot of progress, but as a company now, we see really the next phase as a need to scale up and accelerate. So I just want to tell you that we feel a sense of urgency that we have never felt that much. So we are seeing climate impacting yields and livelihoods of farmers for real. We are seeing farmers quitting farming for real. We are seeing herds being less big, and we see food security issues emerging for real. So I just want to say, we know that, but I just want to say we see that. So when we speak scaling up, it's a need. And that's why, by the way, the CFO of Danone says, okay, I'm ready to accelerate. We can accelerate. We discuss how much there is a business case versus investment case, but in the end, it's the resilience of our food system. So in that context, I told you we did 100 times 2 million to 3 million partnerships. So we found 1.5 million. Now I'm going to EU. In Northern Africa, it's a 100 million euro program. We need partners that can bring, I don't know, 25. And they asked me, okay, but why don't we go with blended? Then I say, well, nobody is making a loan to a farmer in Northern Africa. What do you call blended? So we have kind of, because of the urgency, I believe there is no other solution than go for grants at a bigger scale, and in parallel, build what we've been all talking about, because yes, blended is a real solution. The real solution, very simply, access to finance to a small farmer in an emerging country. And even on this, I would say we are not that far. There is a lot of pilots, there's a lot of things happening, but we need to scale this up. And that's the same as you were saying SMEs, and I mean the smallest of SMEs is a small farmer. There were some comments made this morning, and I agree so much. The farmers are the main investors today in their own resilience, though they are supporting all the burden is a reality, and they are prepared to invest. There was a comment made on Brazil. I see it in many places because it is their own livelihoods future, but we need to find a way to support. So the first one, grant at scale, I name it Kilimanjaro, and the second one, access to small farmers, I name it Everest. And we need to climb them.
on your question and your point, very well taken. And I know we have some farmer representatives in the room. Really hear you that the last mile is really the one that's missing, right? You can find resources of capital at the company level, but when it comes to really getting it to the farmer is really where it gets quite complex. In the business engagement group, there is a group called Grow Asia, for instance, that just focuses on that, trying to grow between the big, high amount partnerships and amounts of money you can mobilize and how to bring it to the smallholder farmers, which is often quite the challenge. Nicole, we're going to hear you a little bit about that. We wanted to hear how can public and private actors co-create governance models that empower producers, ensuring accountability at the landscape level.
Yes, it's a nice, challenging question, of course. I must say that several of the remarks are really speaking to me also. So yeah, how to co-create these models? Of course, the easy answer is it's really a process, and there is no one size fits all. Of course, that's the quick answer. But I think I have a few examples that may be inspirational at different levels, also examples that connect the bigger scale, the international scale, with what happens locally, or what, on the other way around, it connects what happens locally with the bigger scale. One thing is on the capacity strengthening. We have worked with a network of youth entrepreneurs in 4 countries in East Asia, East Africa and the Horn, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya. Young entrepreneurs who want to start business and apply agroecological principles. And there has been a multi-annual program to strengthen the skills of agri-entrepreneurs, their entrepreneurship skills, while they also trained and built their capacities on how to work the soil, the ecosystem, the biodiversity in a way that is profitable for them in the future. These young people, female entrepreneurs, male entrepreneurs, were very motivated to do so, also with the intrinsic value of the ecosystem that is their future, the future of their lives, and the soils that get already to regenerate. This program has worked a lot to strengthen the capacities, and many of the youth that were part of this process were more capable of starting a business, have started businesses of different natures, and were also more bankable. Of course, access to finance was very important for them. But I think the scale of such a network is an important piece of this complex puzzle to see also how you can mobilize big numbers of young farmers also into strengthened ecosystem management and stronger food systems and value chains. Shared value, I think my neighbor talked about that. There's a case of a potato sector partners, including from the Netherlands, that are strong in the international potato sector and also in innovative potato sector technologies. They worked with farmers in the Andes in Peru, paying for ecosystem services, and that enhanced the biodiversity, the agro-biodiversity. Of course, we all know the very beautiful numbers and varieties of potato. They have collaborated. The farmers grow the land, maintain the land, and grow potatoes in value chains at the local or national level, whereas the international partners value their role in maintaining the biodiversity. And it's just a case also where possibly the governance is a financial governance mechanism. How is the financial value in that between the different players? Do the players see indeed the common value of maintaining the agro-biodiversity for the future? And what does that mean in the short term for the payments? And I'm not a specialist in ecosystem payment services, but I can imagine this short-term payment for the farmers is really also a common shared, well, public good, let me call it like that, because we want the potatoes to keep the variety that they have. Maybe if I may, one third example is how to connect value chains that are international with indeed the landscape approach or the food systems approach. Our partners in the corporate social responsibility network in the Netherlands, MVO Nederland, for those who speak Dutch, have also worked in the coffee value chain, and partners in the Solidaridad network have worked in also in value chains that source, for example, from Uganda. And they applied a food systems approach to how they worked with farmers in Uganda. And you may call that a landscape approach also, ability that could be enhanced in sourcing from countries in different parts of the world, and integrated a number of different factors of sustainability when discussing the sources. And of course, it has the consumer part also, that the consumer needs to be aware and also be capable of payment, willing to pay a bit more and to understand also the value. Is that governance? I think it's governance because it's about who is capable of deciding of different elements in the value chain, and is there a willingness to render it more sustainable. I hope this answered your question.
Yeah, very much so. I think something that I've heard here that I haven't heard before was this idea around, some of you call it values, aligning values. Some other call it metrics, right? I think ultimately this is how can we get all of the different stakeholders, talking about policymakers, talking about farmers, the other private sector, because farmers are private sector, value chain corporates, but also financiers and others, to agree to a small number of outcomes that we're all going forward, and we're going to incentivize, and we're going to find co-investments for, right? So within the regenerative landscapes actual agenda, we like to put these 5 being farmer livelihoods first, and then climate, biodiversity, soil health, and it'd be really interesting to see, whether this resonates. I mean, we've aligned quite a lot of groups around this. We can have a longer discussion around it, but I think if we can simplify and all agree that these are core, and then find ways to really redirect the investment to the farmers ultimately, and through the different stakeholders towards those 5 outcomes, we're maybe going somewhere. So I think that was really a powerful piece we heard here. I know, Matthias, you wanna react? Do you want to react before, or do you want Lian to come in now? And
wouldn't mind to react.
okay, you react, and then Lian, you'll have the last words.
Okay, brief reaction because a lot of things you said sounds like music in my ears. Talking about smallholder farmers, also a little bit response to your question. I think, there's a marketing which we have to do, like marketing of products of smallholder farmers. We try, for example, the communications, everybody knows Champagne, Parma ham, but we try to do that successfully since more than 20 years in China, but also in Africa now. So that's one thing. We get a little bit of premium price, a higher price, which the farmer should get, of course, also. That's another thing, yeah. And then I talked 2 days ago, talked to Andrea Illy, for example, from Illy Coffee. We all know it, we pay a little bit more, but Illy pays 30% premium to the smallholder farmer. Yeah, these are examples that you give more to the farmers, yeah. And of course, at home, we have to tell stories. We have to tell stories why you should buy a higher retail price. I know in times of economic difficulties, it's challenging, but this story has to be told. And if you want to pay a low price, that it goes on cost of somebody else. And that's not the world which I think we want to see in the future. And finally, on that it's difficult to get access to finance to smallholder farmers. I think the answer is aggregation, partly through cooperatives. We do that. We have to do it possibly through the EUDR in terms of geolocation, or outgrower schemes, private sector. In many countries, it works very well. Again, you need a responsible investor and responsible businesses to do that. But you have that, and I think there are more and more young companies which believe in shared value in Africa as well. I've seen them, and I think that's the way to go. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Don't be sorry. This is great. This is great. Thank you. So maybe, Lian, for last words, I think, along these lines of converging the metrics or the outcomes we're after, would you like to tell us a bit more about the policies that you see around you?
There's so much food for thought. So in terms of metrics, I think what's interesting, there's kind of 2 angles. One is we need good metrics because we want to incentivize behaviors in the direction that we're looking for. So we're trying to get public goods created from the food system. And we also want good metrics because we want to monitor that the actions we're taking are actually having the positive influence that we have. So that's all positive. And in the room at the moment, I feel like we've been talking at a certain take it up a level to the global scale and maybe introduce some of these questions around trade and convergence across countries to get the multilateral trading system or the regional trading system, just trade in general, to be functioning, then I think it's even more important to be talking about how and what we want to harmonize around in terms of creating good metrics for incentivizing this behavior, for monitoring that we're getting the outcomes we want. What we've observed, so we did a study last year, which was evaluating new types of trade measures that our OECD members are implementing at the border to try to incentivize environmental outcomes in their trading partners. And so the EUDR is in that basket, but we had 130 different measures that the OECD member countries are using, including in RTAs and national measures. And what we saw is half of those, so we started counting from 1990, and half of those measures, 130 measures, came in the past 4 years. So there's been a real uptick in these kind of measures at the border, which I think is interesting from a policymaker perspective, but also from a business perspective. What are the metrics that are being asked of traders in order to prove that they're satisfying what these new trade measures are requiring? And that's been a little untransparent, I would say, in some instances. There's lots of effort to try to make sure that now there's engagement with the private sector to understand clearly what those measurement tools are. But it's really important because what it implies is trade costs with this lack of transparency and what the metrics actually are. And just to add to that, we see in the private sector lots of innovation on metrics. So I can give one example. We've been doing work on carbon footprint in the ag sector, and we are drilling into farm level carbon measurement tools. And in the past year, the people working on it have come up with 300 different kinds of farm level carbon footprint management tools. And that's a very complicated world for the private sector to be navigating. Lots of them are coming from the private sector, some are coming from the public sector. And I think in a world where there's so much diversity around metrics, also of introducing costs to the system. So there is I pick up on your theme, being able to have some kind of harmonized alignment around what we're going to measure in order to reduce the cost, in order to make sure that the system is inclusive, because we know that if in a world where lots of different metrics exist, the smaller stakeholders, the small and medium enterprise, the smaller farmers are in a world that's even more complicated. I think that there's a good argument for this harmonization around metrics.
Thanks so much. So you've brought in another angle indeed, beyond the market we talked about, is trade as well, quite interesting. Are we able to really converge the different efforts in the same direction in a time when we know there is quite some polarization and different ways of seeing the world? So I guess I'll leave you with this now, because I know we're keeping you guys away from lunch, but there was another person wanted to react before. Okay, you go ahead, Emmanuel, and then we'll turn to the closing remarks.
Reaction, because I felt I forgot to say something. Indeed, on all these topics, what I see at least is there are people that really start to work together. And I'm really seeing that also. We are seeing climate change impact, but also seeing that one of the aspects is indeed, at least now, companies talk together really very seriously. And there are many places where we say, okay, I had my metric, you had your metric. How do we build this together? Or what we mentioned about these landscape approaches, because there is always this question of in the end, what is the business case? And we keep saying there is an investment case, but at least if we can together work on a landscape and share the cost between public, private, and the farmer at the center, I believe there is a solution. And we see also this accelerating. So in a way, as far as I'm here to accelerate that, because I believe this is the way we can accelerate and have impact.
Thanks. It's a nice hopeful word to close this panel here. I'd like a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you so much. I think we're going to take a picture of the panelists, and then we'll move to the closing remarks from Peter Bakker. President and CEO of the WBCSD.
All right, closing remarks. I now understand why in every other session in this building, after a very rich conversation, somebody is making closing remarks and just reads his own statement. Because there were so many topics discussed here, how do I summarize this? But I still am going to give it a try without reading my statement. First, let me thank everybody for being here. Let me thank the private sector people for coming out. It's not always been the most inviting place in the UN to come out, but this year we really managed to get more than 300 business leaders, to the policymakers, to join us, because we know that scaling, which was mentioned, is the next phase of what we all talk about, can only happen if we bring, I don't know how many P's Emmeline used, but the governments, the finance, the farmers, and people, I guess those are your consumers, together in one conversation. I think what I take out of this is that business is on this case. And not just for moral reasons, not because we want to be good citizens, but because this is about the resilience of the food system, and at the end of the line for business, predictability in their supply chains. And supply chains are under massive risk. You know, sometimes we just talked yesterday, 30 people died in Beijing, floodings. This morning, already 10 people died in Romania from floodings. So why do I make these comments? Because I've been on a farm in South Germany after the floodings there a year. One plot of land was traditional farming. Another plot of land had 1 year of regenerative agriculture. And a third plot had 5 years of regenerative agriculture. The traditional plot, all the topsoil had flooded away. The 1 year regen plot had a bit of damage. The 5 year regenerative agriculture plot had no damage. All the soil still there, productivity, protection of the livelihood of the farmers still there. So we also must get to this conversation in a more simple way. Can we agree on a couple of really bold solutions that we all buy into? And regenerative agriculture has got to be the cornerstone of all solutions when you want to transform the food system. So it's fabulous to hear that the action agenda for regenerative landscapes that was launched at COP28 has grown to these enormous numbers. I mean, 50 organizations, 10 billion committed in 110 geographies. It's even better to hear that in Brazil, the lab is now proving the point. And that point we should make a lot of noise about when we are in Brazil for COP30. Partly to show that progress is being made, that new models are being tested, but particularly to inspire others to copy, scale, and grow fast. We have to be able to accept that regenerative agriculture at landscape level is the solution we should all strive for. This second panel was music to my ears, same as it was to Matthias, because you investment dialogues all we like, but the world is super simple. You have a solution, you scale it, you deliver results, you measure them, you disclose them in decision useful information for investors, and then capital will flow. That's the way the world of capitalism works. But in order to get to decision useful information for investors, you first need companies to make better decisions, use better data. And that's where metrics will come in. And yes, I know I was kind of in two minds because at 11 o'clock in CR5, there was, let's build a new accountability framework for the food systems. Please don't build another accountability framework. We have the ISSB, we have the CSRD, we have enough frameworks. It's a global set of standards. Let's have deep conversations. What are the metrics that the food system needs to be on track to deliver a net zero, nature positive food system that can nourish all people? But let's not build out a new framework. Business is going nuts with the amounts of forms it has to fill. But business must understand one thing, and that we need to be able to show the world what it is we do in metrics that are robust, that are material, and that are useful for the audience that we present it to. And if the solutions we build here, regenerative agriculture landscape solutions, deliver results, those results translated in metrics, those metrics will build trust, and trust will, and partnerships will make this scale. So I think it's been a brilliant session. I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank the panelists, Emily, for moderating it. And it's one of the important notions of this summit this year. Create partnerships to scale solutions, hold ourselves accountable by a globally standardized set of metrics, and we'll be a lot better off. Thanks for coming out.